War.
By 1644, after 2 years of civil war, England was being destroyed. Roundheads and Cavaliers were laying waste to their own country. In the north, the King's Cavalier forces were on the run, and as they retreated to York, they torched the surrounding land. Outside the city, the two sides were to fight their greatest battle. This is the story of the Civil War. Not just the English Civil War, but a conflict that engulfed all of Britain and Ireland. A time of terrible bloodshed, political double-dealing, and radical new ideas. The chaos of those years unleashed religious rivalries and clan conflicts in Ireland and Scotland. In England, the country was almost evenly split between Royalist Cavaliers, who supported the King, and the Roundheads, who backed Parliament. The Roundheads had signed a deal with the King's enemies in Scotland, the Covenanters. Together, they had laid siege to York, the Cavaliers' largest stronghold in the north. The King ordered his finest commander, Prince Rupert, to rush to the city and force the Roundheads back. But there was one man who was equally hungry for victory. A brilliant Roundhead cavalry commander called Oliver Cromwell. This was to be the start of the descent of the Three Kingdoms into total war. Now, in July 1644, the two massive armies would meet face to face. The Cavaliers surged forward, tempting the Roundheads away from York and onto Marston Moor. But it was a bluff. Instead of confronting their army, Rupert circled behind the Roundheads and relieved the city. Rupert decided to attack the Roundheads the following day. 50,000 men would fight at the Battle of Marston Moor. Never again would a battle this size be fought on British soil. The Roundhead and Scottish Covenanter forces were trying to regroup after their humiliating withdrawal from the city.
Rupert hoped to finish them off by attacking their disarrayed forces in the rear.
Rupert needed all the men he could get. As he marched off in pursuit of the Roundheads, Rupert gave orders for the 5,000-strong York garrison to follow on immediately. The garrison's commander was outraged at the young prince's presumptuous request. After a 2-month siege, his exhausted men were in no state to fight a battle. By 11 a.m., Rupert was poised to attack, but the troops from York had yet to join him. Rupert would have to wait, and wait, and wait. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon before the first troops from York began to arrive. It was too little, too late. The Royalists had squandered the element of surprise. As the two armies stood ready on Marston Moor, the Cavaliers' commanders argued over whether to attack. By 7:30 p.m, Rupert decided it was getting too dark to fight and retired his men for the night.
On the other side of Marston Moor, the parliamentarian generals had a different idea. They saw the Royalist campfires and decided this was their moment. The Roundhead cavalry commander, Oliver Cromwell, called together his 3,000 horsemen, known as the Ironsides, and charged.
Cromwell caught the Cavaliers totally by surprise. They scrambled to remount, but had barely got moving as the Ironsides reached them.
Parliamentarian and royalist cavalry met together in a clash of steel.
Cromwell's men quickly overwhelmed the Cavaliers. Then disaster struck as Rupert's horse was killed from under him and he scrambled to hide in a nearby beanfield. He would play no further part in the battle.
Cromwell took his Ironsides right across the field of battle. Again and again, he charged the royalist cavalry, who now fled the field and retreated back to York.
The Cavalier infantry were left abandoned on the field. Many ran, but a resolute force of Yorkshiremen, known as the Whitecoats, refused to surrender.
Instead, they stood firm as Cromwell's cavalry circled, slashing and killing the foot soldiers. Cromwell described them as stubble beneath our swords. With over 4,000 royalist casualties, many of whom were buried here in this wood, Marston Moor was a great victory for Parliament. Truly, the triumphant Cromwell wrote from the field, England and the Church of God hath had a great favour from the Lord in this great victory given to us, such as the like never was since the war began.
Marston Moor was a turning point. A new, deadly force had emerged in the Civil War.
Oliver Cromwell is one of history's great dividers. You either love him or hate him.
In the words of one contemporary, never man was higher extolled, and never man was baselier reported of and vilified than this man. To understand Cromwell, I think you need to understand where he came from. He was a man of the East Anglian fens. Amongst these wide open spaces, he felt himself alone with his calling. Cromwell was a complicated, introverted, but fanatical soldier for God. At times deeply compassionate to his troops and family. At other times savage and brutal.
And from Marston Moor onwards, this brave, bad man would become increasingly central to the Civil War.
Cromwell made his name in the 1630s by resisting royal plans for draining the fens. He grew to be a regional figurehead for discontent and became known as Lord of the Fens.
Cromwell was not a political or social revolutionary. It was religion which inspired his rebellion. Sometime during the early 1630s, he experienced a spiritual rebirth. Oh, I lived in and loved darkness and hated the light, he wrote. I was the chief of sinners. Living in Ely, with the cathedral dominating the landscape, Cromwell had a strong sense of the presence of God in his life, and it drove him to believe in a divine plan for England, in which he, Cromwell, would play a leading role. And he felt that his own personal salvation depended deeply on defeating a king who was corrupting England's Protestant heritage.
Living in the shadow of Ely Cathedral in this form of vicarage could only have added to Cromwell's belief in his divine mission. When Parliament reconvened in 1640, Cromwell was elected MP for Cambridge, and there he began to place himself at the forefront of opposition to the king. During the first 2 years of the Civil War, Cromwell's religious zeal was matched by his display of bravery on the battlefield. And at Marston Moor, he emerged as a brilliant military commander.
But what the history books don't tell you is that the dynamic of this war was far more complex than a simple battle between Roundheads and Cavaliers in England. Again and again, it was Charles's three kingdoms colliding into each other, which sent the war into new directions. And it was events in Scotland which were now giving Charles new hope. The Scottish Covenanters, led by the Earl of Argyll, had overcommitted themselves. Their invasion of England had opened up a flank in the Highlands, and now forces loyal to the king were uniting together to stab the Covenanters, Parliament's key allies, in the back.
The troubles of the 1640s were not confined to England. In Scotland, the Civil War had become as much of a clan feud as a fight between king and parliament. The Covenanters' leader, the Earl of Argyll, was also chief of the powerful Campbell clan. Argyll was allied with Cromwell against King Charles, and he dominated Scotland.
The soldier who led the Royalist fight back was James Graham, the Earl of Montrose. Originally, Montrose had been a supporter of the Covenanters, but he turned against them when they allied with the English Parliament.
Here at Blair Athol in the Highlands, Montrose brought together the clans willing to fight for King Charles.
The first to join were the fearsome Highlanders of the MacDonald clan, eager for any chance to take on the Campbells and their clan chief, the Duke of Argyll. The second were a troop of 2,000 soldiers sent from the Irish MacDonalds to help Montrose in his struggle. Once more, the Western Highlands provided the backdrop for another bout of the ancient Campbell-MacDonald feud.
The MacDonalds despised the Campbells with a vengeance, and they formed the core of Montrose's small royalist army. It was this clan feud, more than any loyalty to King Charles, which really motivated Montrose's coalition.
Unlike the rather orchestrated battles of Marston Moor and Edge Hill, Montrose ran a guerrilla-style operation. He didn't have all that much cavalry, troop numbers or firepower, but he was a brilliant commander. Audacious and daring, he used his knowledge of the Highland terrain and the agility of his small force to deadly effect.
With Argyll away in England, fighting on the side of the Roundheads, Montrose was able to storm through Scotland. He first took Perth, followed by Aberdeen, where his troops subjected the local population to 3 days of looting and killing. In the name of King Charles, Montrose then plunged back into the Highlands and took Inverary, home to Argyll and the Campbell clan. Humiliated by this attack, Argyll returned to Scotland with a massive Covenanter force and went after Montrose. But over the course of the winter of 1644, Montrose outran Argyll. For over 200 miles, the two men played a deadly game of cat and mouse. When they were both exhausted, Montrose turned the tables. Suddenly the hunted became the hunter.
In February 1645, Montrose spied the Covenanter troops here at Inverlochie under the shadow of Ben Nevis. But he couldn't possibly take on such a powerful enemy in open battle. So instead, he used his local knowledge of the area to give his small force the strategic advantage.
Amazingly, Montrose marched his royalist clansmen 30 miles in 36 hours over some of the roughest terrain in the British Isles.
Right round the base of Ben Nevis to get themselves above Argyll's army. They were outnumbered and outgunned 2-1, but they caught the Covenanters completely unaware and delivered the most savage wake-up call you could imagine.
Out of the mist, Montrose's men let out their MacDonald war cry. "Sons of dogs, come, and we will give you flesh." They charged down and massacred Argyle's men. Over 1,500 were put to the sword. It was a dramatic victory on behalf of King Charles.
Argyle was forced to flee. His galley was halfway down the loch by the time Inverlochy Castle fell. The Covenanters were now in turmoil across Scotland. Montrose took the opportunity to give Charles I some advice about how to deal with the Roundheads in England. "The more your Majesty grants," he wrote, "the more will be asked, and I have too much reason to know they will not rest satisfied with making you any less than a king of straw. It is not worthy of a king to treat with rebel subjects while they have the sword in their hands."
Victory in Scotland only encouraged the king. Despite his massive defeat at Marston Moor, he still believed he could win the war. But it wasn't long before Charles was in trouble again. In October 1644, he was trapped at Newbury by the Roundhead army. Yet somehow, the parliamentarians let the king escape. It was a costly mistake, and here at Donnington Castle, only a few miles from Newbury, they made another. Having taken the castle, the Roundheads allowed the Cavaliers to slip back in and retrieve their stores of arms and munitions. At Donnington Castle, the Roundheads stared victory in the face and blinked. After 3 years of war, many of the Roundhead leaders no longer seemed hungry for the fight. The decision to re-engage the Cavaliers hopelessly divided the Parliamentarian Council of War. Alliances often have a tendency to crumble in the face of victory. Just like the Allied powers after success in the Gulf War, not knowing whether to go after Saddam Hussein, the parliamentarians were totally split over just how far to pursue the king. The defeatist Earl of Manchester advised against attacking the king. "In fighting, we venture all to nothing," he said. "If we fight 100 times and beat him 99 times, he will still be king. If he beats us once, or the last time, we shall be hanged." But Oliver Cromwell was far more bellicose. "My lord, if this be so, why did we take up arms at first?" What divided Cromwell from Manchester and Essex was religion. Cromwell and his Puritan supporters demanded a root and branch reform of the Church of England, while the parliamentary old guard merely wanted to protect the Church from Charles's innovations. As the debate became more heated, Manchester accused Cromwell of being a dangerous radical. "Is this the liberty we claim to vindicate by shedding our blood?" he asked. "Posterity will say that to deliver them from the yoke of the king, we have subjugated them to that of the common people." What began as an attempt to rein in the power of the king and defend the Church of England was now looking like class warfare. Cromwell knew whoever controlled the army would ultimately win the argument. He planned to usurp the old guard and remodel the army in his image. In December 1644, the Commons passed the Self-Denying Ordinance. This legislation excluded all MPs and peers from commanding the Roundhead army, all except Cromwell himself. The old guard was simply brushed aside. The Roundheads were mostly poorly paid conscripts. Many were reluctant soldiers, forced into fighting by powerful landlords. The army was split into regional divisions with no clear chain of command. Cromwell knew the army would have to change if Parliament was to win the war.
In its place emerged a new model army under the united command of Sir Thomas Fairfax, the leader of parliamentary troops in the north and the hero of Marston Moor. The new model army was more mobile, flexible and deadly. But its egalitarian social composition led opponents foolishly to dismiss it as an unskilled peasant army. One MP scathingly remarked, "The colonels are tradesmen, brewers, tailors, goldsmiths, shoemakers and the like."
Today's modern army is in many ways a descendant of the new model army of the 1640s. Most importantly, it was professional and it was disciplined.
With haste, gentlemen! Fall in on the colour!
The new model army soldiers would be paid regularly, promoted on merit and trained properly.
It's hard now to imagine running an army in any other way, but in the 17th century, this marked a radical break from the amateurism of the past.
Brethren, know this, thou shalt not be cupshotten, as thou hast been to the land.
Like any religiously inspired force, from the Crusaders to the Taliban, the new model army's strength lay in its total commitment to a cause.
Have they wasted money? Well, you may hang your head in shame.
They were determined to cleanse England of Catholicism.
You make painted likenesses. Aye, go forth from this place and sin no more.
The creation of this new army signalled a reborn determination to bring the war to a conclusion. Crucially, Fairfax's commission, unlike the original orders given to the Earl of Essex, did not contain a clause for the defence of the King's person. The Roundheads were now after Charles Stuart himself.
Despite the Roundheads' new militancy, the king still believed total victory remained in his sights. But as Charles amused himself with games, the new model army was closing in. On June the 12th, 1645, Cavalier scouts discovered that the new model army was only 5 miles away. The battle that took place a few hours later near a small village in Northamptonshire would be the most decisive of the Civil War.
2 miles south of Market Harborough, among the ridges, streams and small hills that surround the village of Naseby, the Cavaliers chose to turn and fight the encroaching parliamentarian army.
Almost at once, the Cavaliers had the Roundheads on the ropes. But the discipline of the new model army soon began to tell, and the Roundheads launched a powerful counterattack.
At its forefront was Oliver Cromwell. His cavalry poured down upon the infantry, charging and recharging as the Royalist army collapsed into chaos and confusion. The fleeing Royalists were given no chance to regroup. The Roundhead cavalry pushed on in a merciless pursuit, cutting them down on the road to Leicester. As they plundered their way through the Royalist baggage train, they discovered hundreds of cowering women, the wives and mistresses of the Royalist troops.
Over 100 were slaughtered outright by the Roundheads, who wrongly believed them to be Irish Catholics. Those who were spared had their faces slashed to mark them out as prostitutes.
Something had changed. It wasn't just the appearance of the new model army, but under Cromwell, a new religious fervour was expressing itself in a bloody and terrible way. Naseby was a catastrophe for the Royalists. Charles lost all his guns, all his infantry, and most of his baggage train. Crucially, copies of his secret correspondence were also captured, exposing him as a monarch, happy to do deals with Irish papists and even French mercenaries in the desperate hope of saving his crown.
Apart from a few remaining strongholds, Naseby signalled the end of the Cavaliers as a military force.
Charles's defeat at Naseby also had an effect on the war in Scotland. The Earl of Montrose's luck finally ran out when he found himself outnumbered 3-1 at Philippa in the Scottish Lowlands. He was overpowered by the returning Covenanter forces, no longer required by Parliament after their victory at Naseby.
With the defeat of Montrose, the royalist cause in Scotland collapsed. In Oxford, Charles considered his limited options. Of his 3 kingdoms, now only the Catholics of Ireland gave him hope.
Charles thought a full ceasefire with the Irish Catholic rebels, the Confederates, and a transfer of Irish troops to Britain was what he needed to win the war against Parliament. And as Catholics, the Confederates were far more sympathetic to the king than to the Puritan Parliament.
Charles sent an envoy to deal directly with the Irish Catholics. In exchange for 20,000 of their troops, Charles promised the Catholics official toleration of their faith and greater political freedom.
This was a crucial move. All that the parliamentarians had feared before the war even started, that the king would introduce Catholicism onto these shores, now seemed true.
But before Charles could receive any troops from Ireland, the port of Chester fell to the Roundheads, squashing any hope of Catholic reinforcements getting to England. The plan failed.
Charles had become the Mr. Micawber of the Civil War, always hoping something would turn up. He conjured up all sorts of scenarios for a grand anti-parliamentary alliance involving Scottish, Irish and French forces. Any plan, however crackpot, would get his endorsement. But so far, everything had fallen through. And after a miserable winter in Oxford, receiving almost nothing but bad news, Charles cracked. He decided to run for it.
Late on the evening of April 27, 1646, Charles had his hair cut short and put on a suit of plain brown clothes. Accompanied by 2 loyal courtiers, he slipped into the night disguised as a servant. It wouldn't be long before the Roundheads were hunting Charles down. The king was to become a fugitive in his own kingdom. For a free study guide about the Civil War and listings of other Open University programs, you can visit our website at open2.net/Civil War or call us on 0870 900 0312.